If for some reason this is your first video in this Frankathon of ours, we are going over every Frankenstein feature film I could get my hands on in honor of Guillermo del Toro's upcoming adaptation on Netflix. And I guess also the new Christian Bale Gangster Frankenstein adaptation from Maggie Gyllenhaal, since that trailer just dropped and looks weird as any of them. I feel like that doesn't emphasize how excited I am for it, though, because I really am. This week, we are looking at the Frankenstein series that has largely gone forgotten by the general public. Hammer Studios' Frankenstein ran for 8 movies from 1958 to 1974. And while they don't all star Peter Cushing, they do all choose to focus on Victor Frankenstein while he goes about making a series of monsters this time. Some deserve more love for their designs, some you can do at home. I guess it's time to see where the hammer falls, though. Hammer chose to launch its Frankenstein saga with a pretty powerful retelling that purposefully breaks from Universal's mold and builds its own identity. Peter Cushing really redefines the titular Dr. Frankenstein as not only ambitious, but cruel. Someone whose disregard in others ends up being the real horror of the movie. Because of this, Christopher Lee's monster ends up feeling more like an extension of the Doctor's cruelty and arrogance than its own being and the heart of the story. So remember to take that into your mind if you want more of a monster centric story. The atmosphere shines through. The lush colors and detailed sets feel as important to making Victor feel trapped in his own head. If you're a Franken purist, you're definitely going to throw a fit at Hammer's approach. It is far meaner in spirit and more cruel than any adaptation that has come before. And I love it for being what it is. In the context of this tier list, it is definitely going into S tier. Easy. In 1958, Victor would return under the brilliant alias Dr. Stein, continuing his fun bodybuilding hobby. This story opts to drop any connection to the source material outside of the name and people puzzles. The big brain transplant that becomes the core of the plot with the bad doctor's disfigured assistant feels at the same time tragic and inevitable. The other new characters, though, don't register nearly as strong. Even more than the first movie, the horror and revenge leans into the body horror, floating eyes, grotesque surgeries. All of this ends up sticking with you way more than the plot of the movie. While it doesn't match Curse's dramatic flair, this really proves Hammer was willing to push things into even pulpier territory. The movie really doesn't care about the monster's humanity as much as it does Victor's escalating amorality. A solid B tier movie. A year later, Hammer would take this idea and try to turn it into a series. Not a lot of people know about Hammer's failed Frankenstein television pilot. The premise is strong, a desperate couple begging the Baron Frankenstein, this time played by Anton Diffring, for help, only to become a part of his experiments. It is a tight story that is tragic and feels good in this episodic format. From what I understand, the series would have followed Diffring's Doctor, starting again just about every episode like the movies do, just with a bit more of a Byronic flair. This Frankenstein has some homoerotic undertones that Cushing doesn't lean into. It is a pretty great thought exercise to think of a full season of Frankenstein taking on a new patient of the week. While this pilot could never have any of the production heft that comes with the movies, it certainly tries. It smartly leans more into the psychological horror and moral dilemma with a Frankenstein who needs people to need him for this to succeed as a concept. Definitely not essential Hammer viewing, but I think it is more than worth your time. Another solid B tier. I guess after the TV series went nowhere, Hammer chose to hit the reset button, waiting until 1964. Victor is back in his hometown, previous adventures ignored. This monster looking like a legally distinct version of Universal's monster, despite actually having the rights to the actual design since Hammer chose to work with Universal Studios for this picture. The plot centers around a corrupt hypnotist controlling the creature, a lot like Igor from Universal's Son of Frankenstein, just full of that good old Hammer sleaze. This movie feels padded though, probably because it started as a script for that scrapped TV series and was stretched to feature length. At points, it feels like the movie is cutting to commercial break even. Still, the Hammer set designs continue to impress, and Cushing is still the fantastic actor we know and love. The pace just drags a little. Thematically, it is also the flattest by far so far. Victor is more of a stock villain playing mad scientist. It is not awful, but firmly a lesser Hammer. Nestle this right into the C tier. Frankenstein Created Woman from 1967 is what happens when Hammer tries to get really experimental. This is another TV script turned film, but instead of a stitched together body, Victor chooses to get into the science of transferring the soul of a man into his lover's body, which creates an interesting monster that really hits on themes of gender and identity. We are obviously getting into metaphysical sci fi, though it doesn't explore that potential nearly enough. If you missed the soul transplant scene, you'd think they did just any old brain swap from the Universal movies. But the crisis the movie raises, how one's identity could shift if trapped in another body, feels really fresh for a Frankenstein movie. Really altered carbon esque, if you need a modern example. The opening execution has weight, and Hammer's only Lady Frankenstein has a real pathos thanks to Susan Denver. Martin Scorsese has called this movie a favorite of his, and while I think that overstates the quality a touch, it is definitely one of the more interesting Hammer films. Victor is still the villain through and through, but the creature gets to embody the spirit of some of Mary Shelley's themes. I'm gonna nudge this right into the A tier. Okay, I am not going to lie. Frankenstein must be destroyed. I like this a lot, going right into S tier. I love the idea that Victor pulls off a brain transplant successfully and things still go to shit for him. Freddie Jones plays the monster this time way more human than any that came before, with a few scars and one of my least favorite designs for the monster. But if it means that the creature is more articulate and his plight ends up being more tragic, I will definitely take it. Cushing's Frankenstein has never been more of a bastard, letting his sadism go further than any movie before. Sometimes it feels a little melodramatic, but Cushing and Jones are great together. This is one of the Hammer Frankensteins that really lingers after the credits roll, not just for the spectacle, but for the complete moral decay we get to watch. If Mary Godwin's novel warned of unchecked ambition, this is about the horrors that can come from ambition achieved. Okay, if we are looking at Tales of Frankenstein, we have to look at Horror of Frankenstein. This reboot has Ralph Bates take up the role as a younger Frankenstein with the intent to inject more of a dry wit into the formula. On paper, this is supposed to be a darkly comedic take of the original story. In practice, it ends up being only slightly lighter in tone. Honestly, I wish we could have just let Cushing have a little more fun in the role, and we could have gotten there. David Prowse plays the monster, except like Lee's, he is more of a plot device without agency, personality, or any real tragedy. I really like the maid who almost gets out of the movie alive before the movie undercuts her by having her just you should just watch it for yourself. While Bates brings his own energy, the movie he is in feels entirely redundant. A retelling of Curse of Frankenstein with less bite. And it's an interesting what if, but the weakest of Hammer Frankensteins for me. Down to D tier. Then Hammer's Franken finale puts Peter Cushing and David Prowse together long before they'd hang out on the Death Star as Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader. Victor is again hiding out, this time in an asylum, a setting I don't love for a bunch of reasons, but it does perfectly suit Frankenstein's obsessions. Prowse gets to play the monster a second time for Hammer with a totally different design, way more ape like, stitched together. It almost echoes Thomas Edison's creature design. Cushing looks worse for wear, but still brings all the energy. It gives Victor Frankenstein a wary cruelty as if the years have drained him. Probably because Cushing was actually being drained by these movies. We even get a solid little arc for this movie's assistant. Still, much of the movie rehashes beats we are familiar with by now in a Frankenstein grave robbing, body horror experiments, villagers with torches, all the atmosphere. This is a respectable way to go out, Hammer. Another beat here. Hammer films are here to give you a real kick of man made horror that sets a cycle of cruelty into motion. Next week, we are looking at the Frankenstein movies that don't adapt the stories or characters as much as they choose to use the Frankenstein name and iconography that the series we have been talking about so far the last 2 weeks have been building. So please, please, please go out and be a better person than Cushing was as Frankenstein. That's all I got to say. He was a real bastard.